Hello and welcome to this massive sketchbook tour where I'm going to show you for the first time ever every single one of my sketchbooks that I'm currently working in and what I use them for. In today's video, which is part 1, I'll share 5 sketchbooks that I use mainly for drawing on location, but also when I'm sketching from photos. In part 2, I'll be showing you around 5 different sketchbooks, which I use for mainly character designs, project concepts, and for a variety of ideas that I explore inside my studio. I'll link to part 2 here as soon as the video is available. But for now, let's have a look at the first 5 sketchbooks and how I use them. My name is Alex, I'm a professional artist, and now let's get started. First up, we have this tiny panorama sketchbook, which I made myself, and this one is always coming with me when I go outside to sketch. Then there's this one, which is also really handy for drawing outside. It has lots of pages, it handles a variety of mediums really well, including watercolors, and the paper also dries really quickly, which means you don't have to wait for very long between each layer. I also have this one, which is the third and final sketchbook I like to bring with me when I sketch on location. I always bring 3, and then I work on 3 spreads at the same time, jumping between them while I wait for the others to dry. This one here is a bit of a hybrid. I have used it on location a fair amount before, but these days I prefer the smaller, lighter ones for that. And so this one kind of grew into my go-to choice for drawing from photos I've taken. As for the 5th and final sketchbook that I'll share with you today, this one is actually the first one I ever made. And although the sketchbook is very much all over the place, it also marks a huge stepping stone for me, and it's pretty much where my sketching habits became what they are today. But now it's time to jump into the first sketchbook of today's tour. And as I flip through the pages, we will actually be seeing a bunch of sketches that I've already shared before on my channel as process videos, and so I'll make sure to link those videos in case you're interested in learning more about the process. This sketchbook I made myself a couple of years back, and I kept it kind of simple, kind of basic, because at the time I wasn't even using watercolors that much. But I've always kept some cheap watercolor paper around in my studio for different experiments, and so I thought, why not make a watercolor sketchbook that I can use for the same reason? And funny enough, over the past 2 years, I've been using watercolors more and more, and today I would even consider it one of my primary mediums. But I haven't always kept a sketchbook. I got my first sketchbook ever when I was just in my first year of art school because, well, I saw all these other artists with a sketchbook and I just felt like it was something that I was supposed to have, even though I didn't really know why at the time. Before then, I'd always been sketching on loose sheets of copier paper, and it was usually for a very practical purpose, like trying to solve a problem related to a specific project or illustration I was working on. And once that problem was solved and the illustration was done, I would just throw the sketches away. You might say that I was very practical or goal-oriented. I sketched when I needed to and only then. So keeping a sketchbook and drawing in it with no clear purpose just seemed a bit strange to me. Kind of like doing math without actually having a problem to solve. But convinced that I should have a sketchbook now that I was an art student, I went and bought myself one. It was this fancy A4 sized book with a black leather imitation cover. And so there I was with my new, fancy, expensive sketchbook without any clue of what I was going to do with it or how it would fit into my art practice. And guess what? I barely used it. I tried and I tried, but I just never quite got the point of it. And I was even a little bit intimidated by it. After all, it was a pretty fancy and expensive sketchbook, and I didn't want to ruin it. And so it sat unused most of the time. And then my art teacher actually said something that it didn't quite hit the mark at the time, but it really stuck with me. And several years later, the memory popped back up and the plain and simple advice he'd given back then really landed for me. What he said was, it can be really difficult for some of us artists to get over ourselves and not feel like we have to perform or create a masterpiece with every single line that we draw. We just gotta find a way to trick ourselves out of that mindset. Some people sketch on cheap, throwaway paper like post-it notes because it takes away that need to perform and the fear of messing up on expensive paper. So don't buy those expensive leather-bound sketchbooks, you know? Buy something cheaper. Throw your sketchbook on the ground. Step on it, make it dirty, destroy it a little bit. His point was basically that if you destroy your sketchbook a bit before you use it, or if you work on paper that has little to no value, then you might not feel so afraid of ruining it. After all, you can't ruin a sketchbook if it was already a bit destroyed to begin with. And although I will say that I've never felt the need to step on my sketchbook or destroy it like my teacher said, the advice is still really helpful, and I think that it can take many different shapes for different artists. For me, the biggest game-changing thing was learning about bookbinding and that I could make my own sketchbooks with any paper and any format that I chose. And because I made this particular sketchbook myself, it didn't feel so intimidating to use it because I knew I could always just make a new one. And that takes a lot of pressure off of the whole thing. Little tricks like that can make a huge difference when you struggle with some kind of performance anxiety. Now let's have a look at this little sketchbook. As I mentioned, this is one of my 3 go-to sketchbooks for sketching outside. It's small, it's light, it's mixed media paper, and it dries really fast when I use watercolors. I got this sketchbook around the time when I'd started to recognize that I wasn't really vibing with A4 sized sketchbooks for most uses. I like A4 sketchbooks for characters because the tall format is perfect for full figure drawings, but for almost everything else I prefer a smaller sketchbook. Just something that I can carry around, something where I can fill a sketchbook spread pretty quickly. And when I saw this small sketchbook in the art supply store, the size and the color just seemed so fun and friendly to me, and I could just really see myself using it casually just for fun. And that has really been the case with this one. Many drawings in here are done on location. Many are also drawn from photos that I've taken at a time when I either didn't have time to sit down and draw, didn't have my sketchbook with me, or because it was just too cold to sit outside. I've also used it to create some concepts for both standalone illustrations and for bigger projects like the comic book that I'm currently working on. I've also filled a huge portion of this sketchbook with silly comics that I have made based on playing the game Repo with friends. But I won't go into detail about that since I know you guys are here for the art and you might not even be familiar with this game. But I just wanted to share one example here as a way of saying that you can draw a lot of inspiration from everyday life. Art doesn't have to be serious or even beautiful. Art is also a form of communication. It's about delivering a message or conveying a feeling or provoking a thought. And sometimes it just is, without any deeper meaning, just something that you chose to create for your own reasons. I've used a lot of different mediums in this sketchbook. That's why I love to use mixed media paper. Then I'm not bound to one single medium for an entire book. I can pick and choose whatever I feel like on a particular day and whatever I have space and energy to bring with me when I go outside to draw. I've primarily used watercolors and colored pencils in this sketchbook, but I've also used some gouache, ink, and markers. For me, variety is important in my art practice, otherwise I can end up feeling constricted, uninspired, or even bored. That's also why having so many different sketchbooks is really helpful for me in my art practice. It keeps things fresh and interesting, and it's just what I need to be creative. I'm curious to hear what you need to feel creative and inspired, and what's the biggest blocker for you when you try to draw, if you feel like sharing it in the comments. This funny little sketchbook was never planned, and what I mean by that is that even though I made it myself, I never meant to make it. I was making a different sketchbook altogether, a square watercolor sketchbook from A4 sheets of paper. And after I trimmed off all of the excess paper, I ended up with this big pile of neat folded signatures, which just seemed like such a waste to throw away. But even though the format was a bit unusual, I decided to stitch together a sketchbook from the excess paper anyway. At first, I didn't really know what to do with it, but at some point during my lunch break one day, I decided to bring it with me outside for a quick sketching trip. And that's how I learned that this small panorama format was perfect for sketching landscapes. And I started using it a lot, bringing it with me basically anytime I went outside to draw. And the funny thing is, that other sketchbook, the square one that I made intentionally, I haven't actually used it that much yet. So that's yet another example of how sometimes the sketchbooks we care the least about can become our go-to choice, even though we never expected it. The majority of the art in this sketchbook is done on location, but a few of them were based on photos and made inside my studio. Even though I love heading out into nature with a sketchbook and some art supplies, sometimes I just don't feel like packing and traveling, and that's when having a lot of photos from different locations where I've been can be really useful. Next up is this A6 landscape format watercolor sketchbook. And this one actually has quality watercolor paper in it, as opposed to most of my other sketchbooks. But I like this format a lot, and the size is just perfect for me. This one also comes with me every time I go outside to sketch. I usually bring 3 different sketchbooks with me whenever I sketch outside. And then I'll find a spot to sit down with something interesting around, and I'll choose 3 different things or angles to draw, open 3 sketchbooks and work at them at the same time, jumping from one to the other while the previous one is drying, especially if I'm working with watercolors. That way I can stay in my flow and keep working rather than being forced to pause while the sketchbook page is drying. Then last but not least, it's time for the 5th and final sketchbook for this tour. And this one is, as I mentioned, the first sketchbook I ever made myself. I just learned bookbinding and I had this paper that I really liked, which is this thick mixed media paper that you can use for basically anything except watercolors. It doesn't really do water, the paper just dissolves, but you can do basically everything else like gouache, acrylics, ink, all kinds of pencils and crayons, and even alcohol-based markers. I used the sketchbook a lot in the very beginning for pretty much everything. It was the first book that I'd started since that fancy, expensive A4 sketchbook that I bought when I was an art student. And this is really where my exploration of keeping a sketchbook started and became what it is today. And this isn't something that I did because I thought I was supposed to, like back when I was an art student, but because it was something that I'd grown curious about and that I wanted to try. You'll see a lot of different things in this sketchbook. I experimented with markers, colored pencils, acrylics, acrylic markers, ink, pastels, and watercolors, which is how I discovered that I kind of needed another sketchbook for that. Some of the spreads I worked on inside my studio, but I also brought the sketchbook with me outside a lot in the beginning to sketch on location. I would say that this is probably my least used sketchbook today, simply because I can't use it for watercolors, which is something I've been using quite a lot for the last 1 to 2 years. And it's also a bit too big and clunky for me to want to bring along on hikes in nature. So most of the time, this sketchbook just kind of sits on my shelf. But that doesn't really matter, because what matters is that this is where a new curiosity started, and that curiosity has kept growing ever since, just in a slightly different shape and form. But preferences kind of come and go for me, and I'm sure that I'll find my way back to this sketchbook in due time. And that's it for part 1 of this massive sketchbook tour. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by giving it a like and leaving a comment. I would love to hear about your experience with sketching and keeping a sketchbook. I think that this is something that many artists can have complicated feelings about. Some might keep a sketchbook because they feel like it's something that they should do or that they have to do. Some might feel a bit of performance anxiety around the fear of messing up in their sketchbook, and some might just struggle with finding the time and motivation or the right ideas. Whatever the case might be for you, I would love to hear about it, so drop a comment below. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I will see you in the next one.